Hi, God's beloved. It is so good you can join us for our last and seventh I am saying of Jesus, where Jesus declared in John chapter 15, verse 1, that I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. And later in verse 5, I am the vine, and you are the branches. Remember at our last session in chapter 14, Jesus and his disciples were at the upper room celebrating the Passover. As we come to chapter 15, they are no longer in the upper room. It is deep into the dark of the night, and Jesus is left with the 11 disciples after Judas left them to betray Jesus. Chapter 14 ends with Jesus saying this, "Get up, let's go from here." They must have left the upper room to make their way to the Garden of Gethsemane. On the way there, Jesus still continues with his farewell discourse with his 11 disciples, recorded in chapters 15 and 16, despite the hour of his death drew closer. Jesus was concerned for his disciples and wanted to prepare them for what was about to happen, and to reassure them the everlasting relationship they have with Jesus and the Father. In chapter 15, Jesus employs a different metaphor to describe the relationship between believers, himself, and the Father. The Father is likened to be the vine dresser or gardener. Jesus is portrayed as the true vine, and we as believers are represented as the branches. In verse 5, Jesus says to his 11 disciples, "I am the vine and you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit, for without me you can do nothing." What does it mean to abide in Jesus? The Apostle John gives us the answer in 1 John chapter 4, verse 15, where he says, "Whoever confesses that Jesus is the Son of God, God abides in him and he in God." So Jesus is declaring to the disciples that they are his branches. He was recognizing them as abiding in his vine, and they belong to him and are closely interconnected, and they will bear much fruit. But without the vine's help, the branch cannot achieve anything. However, we see in verse 2, Jesus identifies two types of branches in him, fruitful or unfruitful ones. He says, "Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away, and every branch that bears fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit." It appears, verse 2 says that every branch that does not bear fruit, he will take away and remove from the vine, meaning he will remove his disciples or born-again believers who do not bear fruit, and puts the responsibility on believers to bear the fruit. However, isn't the branch always dependent on the vine and the vine dresser to be fruitful? The words "take away" in Greek is airo, which may not be the suitable translation for this verse. The word airo can also mean to lift up or pick up or raise up, and has been similarly translated in many other places in the New Testament. For example, in Luke chapter 5, verse 24, where Jesus asked the paralytic to airo, to pick up his bed. Grapevines need to be constantly propped up to receive nutrients by being exposed to sunlight. And that is why the vine dresser will lift up and prop up the unfruitful branches that have fallen to the ground, so that they can begin to bear fruit. Further, bear in mind, the verse does not say the unfruitful branch will always remain unfruitful. You know, the Lord picks us up when we fall or fail so that we can be fruitful again. The Lord prunes us, teaching, instructing, disciplining us so that we can bear even more fruit. Amen. Then Jesus talks about another two kinds of branches. Those that abide in Him, mentioned in verse 2, and those that don't abide in Him, mentioned in verse 6. In verse 6, Jesus says, "If anyone does not abide in me, he is cast out as a branch and is withered. And they gather them and throw them into the fire, and they are burned." We learned earlier in 1 John chapter 4 verse 13 that whoever confesses that Jesus is the Son of God, God abides in him and he in God. As believers, we have confessed Jesus as the Son of God. Therefore, God abides in us and we in him today. As such, it is because of unbelief that they do not abide in Jesus, and is like a branch that is cast out and burned. The nation of Israel also rejected Jesus and cut themselves off on account of their unbelief. Here are the questions for our discussions today. 1. Discuss and establish what are the different roles of the vine dresser, the vine, and the branch have in the illustration given by Jesus. What does it mean for believers to bear fruit in this passage? And lastly, the reality is you are abiding in the vine because you have confessed Jesus as Lord. But what can cause you to lose sight of this reality and hinder you from bearing fruit and much fruit? Now have a blessed and meaningful time discussing.